Space, the final frontier. Well, okay, not really. All right, take two. Here in the Mitten State, welcome to Code 47, bringing you all things Star Trek, spanning the quadrants, the best thing since the neutral zone.
Hey, we are back. Code 47 podcast on the Secret Friends Unite Podcasting Network, episode 124. I am your Trek Lord of West Michigan, resident whiz aboard the USS Grand Petoskey in Starfleet International, Charlie Carden, coming at you. Little duo act, kind of cutting back to basics. Aaron is tied up because it is Mother's Day that we're recording. And Jen Watson has unfortunately taken a step back from the podcast, so not certain when we will see her again. We do very much like working with Jen. It was a friendly parting, and we certainly hope that she comes back and joins us someday. But in the meantime, I am joined by the man without the guy I've recorded this show with the longest and proudest, Mr. Peter Stein, Lieutenant Peter Stein, over up on the Petoskey. How are you today?
Doing all right.
Wearing your fine engineering yellow. I like
Indeed.
it. I like it. Do you think it's weird that they kept the same colors for 800 years? After a
little bit, because we did see it change in the 29th century uniforms.
Yeah, but at one point they were just like, we got to have a fashion meeting. We got to get back to basics. I mean, even in the midst of the burn, they changed the costumes like the one that you're wearing and that you do sport. Yeah. Even in Discovery Season 5, is that they still wear those
the gray ones, yeah.
Season 3 uniforms with the department stripe where your blue stripe is. So it's a little different. I don't wear that uniform anymore myself because in SFI parlance, I'm a Commodore now, and that's a uniform I don't have. Yep. So I gave that to April.
I still find this uniform slightly amusing as the style is very reminiscent of Babylon 5.
Oh my gosh, how funny! Which again, that's a show that I never really picked up on. But I'll tell you what, you and I do our Patreon segment, The Facts Geek Life. We've covered Battlestar Galactica. I mean, to be honest with you, I'd give Babylon 5 a crack. I mean, maybe that'll be our next project.
Maybe that'll be the next one. I've got it all. We can watch it all.
I know. Yeah, no, I know it's on Max. But anyway,
almost nowhere to stream it anymore. Maybe Max still has it, but it bounces and disappears all the time.
That's so weird. But anyway, we are off topic as always. But yeah, we're here to talk about some Star Trek, which we will do after I do my very customary Paying the Bill segment, where we give homage to the wonderful folks over on our Secret Friends Unite Patreon. If you visit patreon.com/secretfriendsunite, you can try out our wonderful Patreon segments for free. You can get our other 3 shows without advertisements. And a lot of great fun stuff, including the show that I was just talking about with Peter that he and I do, as well as other guests I have. We pick a classic series. We take a season of that show. We break it down several episodes. And then there's a show that Todd, who is my other SFU Mastermind co-founding partner, we do a great show about comic books called Spinner Rack. So anyway, some of our top tier folks we always like to give love to on the Friends with Benefits level. There's Corey and HD, John Sedorf, the Phoenix Sisters Cosplay, lovely ladies, Brendan Myers, and Matthew Keel. BFF level are top tier folks, the awesome Nias family of the Twin Cities, Sean, Stella, and Henry, and Missy Merchant. We are very grateful to each and every one of you. Again, patreon.com/secretfriendsunite. Try us out for 7 days. And as I'm very fond of quoting Arnold Schwarzenegger from Predator, stick around. All right, let's jump in and talk a little bit about, we have one news story before we jump into talking about Star Trek Discovery. The Peabody Award is a very long-standing since 1940, as a matter of fact, award in the entertainment community, focusing around television, radio, and other media. So clearly radio when it started. Star Trek won a great award in this regard, a lifetime, kind of a lifetime achievement for groundbreaking messages and enduring history, according to this article over at trekmovie.com, which is usually where I get our stories from. Star Trek honored with the Institutional Award. Other recent winners of this award included the Today Show, Fresh with Terry Gross, The Simpsons, 60 Minutes, and The Daily Show with Jon Stewart. So in very prestigious company. Not the first Peabody for Star Trek. There was an individual award in 1987 for the first season TNG episode, The Big Goodbye, which was one of the
not
gems.
an episode that I necessarily would have thought would win.
No, I know
I mean, it's not a bad episode. It's just
it was probably potentially groundbreaking for departure of concept. It was one of the very first big holodeck episode.
That's true, yeah.
And it was really inclusive with, I think, the sets that they made and different things that they did. And it seems that Discovery has been nominated for this award in the past as well. So that's awesome. You know, Star Trek is about to hang on where they're in their 57th year of existence. So we're creeping up on the big 6-0. And, you know, love to see the franchise that we all enjoy honored in this way. So, I don't keep track of a lot of awards. I watch the Oscars every year because it's kind of like peer pressure. But I think that's very exciting to see. The award will be presented in a ceremony in Los Angeles in June, presented by comedian Kumail Nanjiani, of someone of whom I'm a big fan. Even though he was in Marvel's The Eternals, he was one of the bright. He was one of the bright spots. So, Peter, thoughts about the Peabody Award?
I mean, I wasn't terribly aware of it when they announced it. I mean, yay, an award recognizing that Star Trek has had cultural significance and is a great franchise.
Right.
That's good. It's about time.
Big thumbs up.
Think we would have gotten that, at least a decade ago, but you know, whatever.
Well, I mean, a decade ago, there was no Star Trek on the air. So
well, my point is we should have had it by, when Enterprise was on, because then by that we had all of the main, the TNG films are finished and all that.
Right. 2 decades ago.
Yeah, well,
as we're reminded. So
yeah.
Well, that's good.
Yeah.
That is good. No, I'm always happy to hear that kind of stuff. All right. Well, let's jump back into first segment of our show where we talk about new programming. We are now getting into the smack dab in the middle of season 5 of Star Trek Discovery. We got 2 episodes to talk about. So, Peter, why don't you tee us off talking about episode 4?
All right. Season 5, episode 4, Mirrors. Captain Burnham and Book journey into extra-dimensional space in search of the next clue to the location of the progenitor's power. Meanwhile, Rayner navigates his first mission in command of the USS Discovery, and Culber opens up to Tilly.
First question, if I might.
Yeah.
The episode is called Mirrors. Where the hell is Justin Timberlake? Because it's like you're my mirror. Oh, back to you.
Wah, wah.
Womp womp.
Yeah, so this episode, the mirrors it's very, it's an interesting title choice, as there's a lot of reflection of the history of Maul and Locke going on in this episode on board the ISS Enterprise of all places.
Right.
I have thoughts about that.
Same.
But I'll skip that for a second. It's interesting how Maul and Locke, we finally get their backstory, and it's kind of like this odd Romeo and Juliet sort of deal.
Yeah, I got that too.
It's not bad. It's just an interesting choice. It's. I think that these particular characters have some of the most well-defined motivations out of the villains from Discovery.
That's fair. That's fair.
Insofar as it's not just like I'm going to twiddle my mustache and Section 31 where you're just
I've met Eve Harlow and a mustache wouldn't look good on her.
Yeah, probably not.
And then
you never know. She could pull it off.
Yeah, she was super cool. She was on the cruises. I'm sure I've mentioned. I thought she was. We didn't actually interact much at all, but I thought she was pretty cool. I did speaking of that pair, that we find out that Locke is a Breen, and we finally get the Breen helmet off, and they are in fact a Jello mold. So I'm going to
interesting choice.
I think this name of this episode may simply have to be "It was an
Jello
interesting choice."
Yeah.
Yes. Anyway, I thought that was bizarre.
I'm okay with the idea of gelatinous beings. There's no problem with that with an alien choice. It just seems strange for the Breen based on what has been said about them in the past.
Right. Are they furry, or the Breen have to have the cold?
Well, also the long helmet in Deep Space Nine made it seem more that they had some sort of
anteater thing happening.
odd shaped head,
Yeah.
which would be more interesting in like special effects, and the prosthesis back in the 90s didn't really allow you to do that, so just left the helmet on.
Right.
So the idea that's like, I like it, but at the same time it feels a little bit lazy.
Yeah, you're right. Yeah, you're right. Now the Breen design that they use, obviously throughout this flashback sequence, is not terribly inconsistent with what we saw in DS9.
No, the only thing is the long part of the helmet is missing. It's very flat.
So the Breen, their face grew backwards in 800 years.
Yeah, they got liposuction on the face because they're all goo anyway. So.
As a species, yeah. You know what? Here's a thought. Maybe their faces, because when Locke takes off his helmet, I'm going to reveal myself to you because blah blah blah, trust her, this and that. And his face is blah, blah. Who's to say that in the past elongated like that their face being jello didn't just occupy that part of the mask?
It's possible.
With the redesign, it just pushes back.
I wouldn't mind there being a little bit more explanation with it, because I would, as we know, I like consistency.
True. I agree.
Like, it's not the worst idea. I like the translucency. You can see his brain and all that. That, like, it was interesting, giving the whole idea of being exiled from the Breen.
Right.
And that's the reason that they're looking for the stuff, because it's a big payout. Like, I liked most of all of that part of the story.
Right. And it was nice to finally get, like, why are you such a bad guy, or were you a bad guy to start with? Because, you get the vibe that, watching these flashback sequence, she's a smart ass. He is kind of, a little bit of a screw up. His uncle is kind of like, it's kind of like Throw Mama from the Train, which is old.
They feel kind of like, I know this is mixing our metaphors a little bit. Like, everyone talks about them as Bonnie and Clyde. They feel like Han Solo and Chewbacca to me. But
that'll work. You know what? I'll tell you what. If you can turn that into a name for this episode, we'll switch it right now. Pick something.
Give me a sec. I gotta think of it.
All right. Well, I'll grab the reins on this. Let's shift gears. So the main part of present day takes place on the very why the hell is this here ISS Enterprise from Mirror Mirror back in TOS. We get the feeling that obviously we know kind of after that episode, and it's been detailed in beta canon, that Spock, who was then the captain, eventually the captain of that ship, decided to make reforms against the Empire. And clearly at some point he then had to go on the run, and it became a refugee ship, and he hooked up with Mirror Saru, and
I thought was dead.
I have
this thing in my brain that they ate him in season 1. Like, that was part of the horror of the thing. Like, I thought that's what happened.
Kelpians were E10 as detailed in season 1. I don't believe that it was him, but this might require someone to hit us up on Threads, or even send a note to secretfriendsunite@gmail.com, our mailbag, and kind of straighten us out, and we will address that in a future episode. But it seemed really erroneous that it's like, and here's the setting, because that ended up being the setting that had been sitting there for 800 years, because obviously the Romulan science guy was able to put the MacGuffin on there, and unless I'm totally throwing things off. But that whole part of the episode was a total miss for me, because if that had been sitting there for 800 years, why did it have any power?
This is classic Star Trek, but also not in a way that makes sense. Right. Classic Star Trek is like, hey, someone has a set, let's use it. Totally makes sense.
Bingo. And extraordinarily lazy reuse of the Strange New World.
But it was just, for me, and this is where I'm going to get really nitpicky, and I know a lot of people are going to hate me for this, but there is a fully complete TOS set in Ticonderoga.
Right. And they filmed the show in Toronto, so it's
not that far away.
Yeah, it's a road trip they didn't take.
With the multiple protestations that Strange New Worlds is eventually going to evolve into something that is more akin to TOS, it would have made more sense to go and like dress up Agreeblies to the other. And I'm sure that Ticonderoga would have been fine with things getting, as long as it got put back the way it was, but using stuff.
Right. Well,
to be consistent. But
it would have been a huge boon for that. But we know that modern Trek, some people want to call it new Trek, whatever it is, that they have they've
TOS is anathema, basically.
they've softly rebooted the look of TOS. Sometimes I'm okay with it. This really rubbed me the wrong way. I'm going to be in Camp Peter on this one, because in a lot of cases I can make excuses for Discovery, but this really kind of
the part of the issue was there wasn't even like, the only thing that was different was there were like some decals on the doors, and it was just like if you notice, the decals to sickbay had like some extra Art Deco stuff on them,
right?
And it was like, that doesn't really make that transition from Strange New Worlds Enterprise to something more akin to TOS Enterprise, but mirror. And so it's just, it felt very, it didn't feel right. And so that's like one of my big and the fact it's like, oh, they left all the escape pods, but then Maul and Locke still get away in an escape pod.
Right. And all the people who were there 800 years ago who made the crossing also escaped on escape pods, I would imagine, because
they all escaped and they got somewhere.
Right.
Like it sounds like they got to the main to the main universe, which I don't know. It also sounded like they got Spock killed and then had Saru start leading the revolution, which to me is just like, can we not just let Spock have his thing? Like, Saru's a great character, but Mirror Spock, that's his thing. Leave him his thing. That's his one defining act. Leave it to him.
Right. Yeah. And because you're left very strongly at the end of that episode with being like, hey, Kirk made a great difference. And then, we don't pick up the Mirror Universe again until DS9, where we have Intendant Kira, who gives us the thumbnail sketch of why
the Terran Empire completely got
and it is, so unless you have any other thoughts, I have parting thoughts on this one, because we can definitely move on.
I thought that the whole bit with Culber and Tilly was a little weird for me.
I mean, that was one of the few parts I actually liked, because
there's parts of me that I like and parts of me that I don't like. Like watching the next episode, like there's things that about Culber's story with this that are developing that I find interesting, but as a philosopher, there's parts. A philosopher and a theologian, there's things that are just like, that's weird.
Yeah, I just, and again, there's a scene between my two least favorite characters, Adira and Tilly. There's one of those. Tilly comes back and then talks to Culber. Culber has been my surprise breath of fresh air for the season. So he's
actually been like,
I've seen,
and like in previous seasons for me, Culber was kind of like,
he's
whatever.
There. I mean, he was only slightly more there than the background characters they keep trying to, shove in our faces.
Yeah. Here's the thing. I knew his name. Yeah. So there's that.
Right. I do kind of remember the name of the characters. But anyway, not to get too far off the beaten path. Yeah, and we definitely want to move on. I've decided in these notes that I'm going to have a conclusion paragraph and give it a rating. So you're more than willing to do that. A conclusion sentence. And I said, this episode was nonsensical and drowning in tropes, and it used canon to wipe its butt. 3 out of 10. I really strongly disliked this episode.
Yeah, I might give it like a 4, just because I think that adding the backstory to Maul and Locke was a solid addition to the overall story of the season. But outside of that, for me, the whole everything else didn't really work. I did. As a side note, there were some moments with Rayner that I was okay with in this. Like they actually showed that he was a competent commander. That was good for me, because I know that I've been ragging on how they've been using him. So like that was a good moment, especially his whole like first one to do it gets like a bottle of whiskey all around. Like that was just a funny moment for me.
Yeah. He is without a doubt the bright spot of this season. He's a character I'm happy with, but again, Culber keeps coming back and I keep liking what I see. So, all right. Well, moving on to episode 6, this was a weird one for me, and I'll read the summary because while there's, again, unfortunately, lots of part of it I didn't like on it as a Star Trek vehicle, it worked for me. So I'll break it down. Episode 5 is episode 5. I wrote episode 5 on one, and I wrote episode 6 on another. Which is it?
The previous one was 4. This one's 5.
This is 5. Okay. Well, I got my notes screwed up. See, because I have our flow and then I have my notes in 2 different documents. And so, yes, I didn't do a quality control check. So my apologies. Anyway, episode 5 is Whistle Speak. While undercover in a pre-warp society, Burnham is forced to consider breaking the Prime Directive in a local tradition, threatens Tilly's life. Meanwhile, Culber tries to connect with Stamets, and Adira steps up when Rayner assigns them to a position on the bridge. So we have and really the last thing that they mention about Adira is very, very minor. Culber is definitely the B story. And then we obviously have our A story down on the planet. So yes, I wrote first off the bat, yay, another episode that heavily features Tilly. I hate Tilly. I know that's character I can't stand. It's an opinion. So it's my opinion. I did write, there's that whole cold open with Stamets and Michael and Tilly. I just don't know why things have to be so dark, like light-wise, in shows all the time.
Felt like they were trying to do something out of 2001: A Space Odyssey.
They were like, because they were doing something and flicking it. So yeah, our crew is off to a planet that's going to be the source of the next MacGuffin. I write the doctor character who's played by David Cronenberg. What's his name? That's one I
don't remember off the top of my head.
I know he's David Cronenberg, who directed, Jeff Goldblum in The Fly. That's really how I think of him.
Yeah,
kind of a scary movie. So, Culber is trying to get to the bottom of the echo that he's feeling after having his Trill experience. He's talking to a great hollow of his abuela, his grandmother. And I wrote, great scene, because it was captioned, help me practice my Spanish. I'm working at a shop right now where we do equipment sales where most of the staff is Spanish. So
it was weird for me because having known a bit of Spanish, it was like, I mean, that's kind of what it means, but that's not what they're saying.
Yeah, exactly. So, but yeah, there was a lot of Michael's like super implausible logic that led them to the Guff and Heidi hole. And again, the whole, we're going to a non-capable warp species, but it's along an ancient trade route of Denobula. So nice box checked for Enterprise, because there was a thought at the beginning of the season that every Star Trek series is going to get a little sprinkle of fairy dust throughout this this season of Discovery. So yes, it's along their trade route, but at the same time, they stopped off to build these weather stations for these primitives, so that they it got very Star Trekky. But again, I'll stay positive because that was part of the episode I really dug on. I did write, of course, Adira being on the bridge. Her voice is just nails on a chalkboard. She and the guy who plays Gray, again, we've talked about some previous episodes. Those characters are not for me in general, but those actors are even more so not for me in general. I mean, I can take a character that I don't dig on if I can appreciate the performance, and I just don't. So every time I see Adira or Gray, I'm like, But again, lots of parts of Discovery aren't for me, and they aren't necessarily for fans of previous series, and that's okay. But we don't have a big Discovery fan on the episode this week, which is really why I really loved having Jen around. So it's kind of a bummer, but we shall press on, and we shall of course attempt to find the good in everything if we can. So anyway, we're down on the planet. We've got, I kind of labeled the people the backwoods simpletons, because that's an expression I like from watching the show The Righteous Gemstones. You're just a backwoods simpleton, because they're fear folk, and they're like, oh, the spirits and the dust, and it's making things happen. And basically what it boils down to is that this fantastic weather satellite, their stations all over this planet, is breaking down slowly, and so environmental conditions are taking over. But there's naturally a big scary twist, which Peter, I'll dust it on over to you. I'll let the wind blow it over to you.
Yeah. So the interesting twist here is this weather tower it's breaking down, but somehow there has evolved the belief that they need to sacrifice someone in order to get it to work. And so they have this big old race where they like retell this ancient story about water, and it's interesting in terms of like how ancient traditions go. Wasn't that compelling, but it was interesting. And then, so of course, Tilly gets with this other, what was it, Rava? Something like that.
I kept hearing it, and then
I just watched it, but I can't remember the name.
I know it's not a good sign, but I get it.
But a name to that effect, and so she helps, and so then they both go up there, and then you get the twist of like, well, you're going to be sacrificed to the gods, so they bring rain, and it's like, oh well, that seems stupid. Right. It's a machine.
Backwoods simpletons, I'm telling you.
Yeah,
I might have to change out the name of the episode. Keep talking.
Yeah, other than gelatinous Wookies. But
nailed it. All right, you got it. Gelatinous Wookies wins. Carry on.
Anyway, the eventually, like, Burnham decides that the mold is a different color because it's mutated, and so that must mean that there's a power system nearby. And so she goes and reboots what we recognize as 24th century isolinear chips, which I thought was a nice little throwback.
That's not bad. I mean, how is that's weird. So did Nobulans in the 24th century stop by to do a patch on it or some such? Or
well, it sounds like they built it around then.
Oh, so very good.
That's what I get.
Why our Romulans?
Yeah, it's not from Enterprise, but one of the doctors that David Cronenberg's character gave on a 21st century legal pad, which was okay.
That was pretty cool. I guess
it was interesting, but it was like, that's a detail that seems like it should be important, but it definitely isn't going to be in any way.
Yeah, went off in no direction.
So anyway, she finds the control panel. She reboots it. Cool. Doesn't seem to, it like restarts the machine, I guess. But like the way that they talked about it, I thought that it was going to like help reset the entire system, whether they figure out how to get the dots to reset the rest of them. But they didn't end up doing that, which felt like a missed opportunity. But anyway, you get back up there, and then Tilly figures out through like some ancient writing where the puzzle, where the next clue is, because it's one of their symbols for 5 is what was etched on the bottle. Okay, so it's on the fifth tower. But in the meantime, they're losing oxygen because they're now in the vacuum chamber of this terraforming weather tower.
Whoops! For
some reason, and they're gonna die. So, and of course, Reva, whatever the character's name is, it's Reva, I think. Reva's father is over on the side.
We're going to call her Reva. I like it.
Is over on the side, and he's like really sad because she's going to die and all this. And then Burnham decides like, well, we can't beam anybody out, which is another pick I have on this episode, is the transporters stop working again.
They did. Well, you know what? I think I tagged them on the fact that there was some kind of...
There was tritanium. They explained that there was tritanium lining, and that's why it couldn't work.
That has precedence. There's precedence,
but it's 800 years in the future.
Yeah, I know.
It's one of those like, I don't know.
You're right. I'm on the whole very disappointed that they even gave us that tech in the first place, because it's being bullshit. I just absolutely
it's just the way that. Anyway, the transporters are kind of a constant sore point for the both of us, because they just kind of they're inconsistent.
I will make a side note. When Simpleton Girl, Reva, is dying, I absolutely think she is trying to hum Lady Gaga's Bad Romance. If she's like, na, 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 you know the song I'm talking about. Totally it. It was totally sort of my head went. I'm like, did they leave behind a CD back in the 21st century? Oh my gosh.
The interesting thing is then we have Burnham decide to break the Prime Directive, but in like the most 2x4 way possible. It's like the least kid gloves ever version I've seen from any Starfleet character. Like, I'm from another planet, and this is technology, and everything you know is wrong.
Yeah, she does. Okay. In like 2 cents, and the guy's like, "What?"
He then takes a step back when he goes like, "So my gods aren't real." Well, that's not what I'm saying. It's like, I mean, that is literally what you just said. But okay,
you're right.
She does try to backtrack it. I will give her credit for that, but it was like, when I was watching, I was like, oh my goodness, this is the most 2x4 I've seen with like most 2x4 non-accidental Prime Directive break.
Yeah, right. And she says the way she's like, blah, blah, blah. Now again, boy, I struggle because there are some great actors on this show
There's
who
some
I've met
good
in real life.
acting in this. Yeah.
I've met Doug Jones. I like him very much. I've met Sonequa a couple of times and really enjoyed spending time with her. Same thing with Anthony Rapp. It's just I wish I liked the show more because I like these actors so much. That being said, I did have a button on this that really right at the end. Early in the episode, Culber is walking with Book, and Book's like, "Well, I really want to do something to find Maul and Locke because that's the button at the end of this episode. Is they're like, somebody found Maul and Locke, let's jump to their position, which is what we get into in the next episode.
Yeah.
And I do like that Culber goes to visit Book, and he's playing asteroids. And I'm just like, you know what? I love that. And that's how because he tells him, he says, there's nothing you can do at the beginning of the episode. There's nothing you can do. You just got to chill out, find something to distract yourself. And he goes back and plays one of the most classic video games of all time. That's pretty great.
Yeah. I thought that was fun. Yeah. So I also thought it was hilarious how it's like, here's my abuela's I can't remember the name of the dish, but here's my abuela's dish.
Yeah.
Replicator fresh, just like she used to make it.
Yeah. Just like Mom used to make right out of the microwave. So in conclusion, I said that despite the episode's many flaws, which we've discussed, this one had a pretty consistent Star Trek theme. I thought some of the beats worked out, even with the even though I didn't really care for the foot race thing with the bowls. I was like, that kind of felt like killing time. I actually gave this a 7 out of 10. I thought that they kind of accelerated it to a point that made up for, certainly some of the shortcomings of the previous episode. So how about you? What's your statement in conclusion?
I might put it around there, if only because of the Culber bits in this one, actually, which I know we didn't touch on a lot, but like Culber's journey in this particular episode is a little bit more interesting for me, where you have like, he's thinking, oh, it's just a spiritual thing. And it's like, okay, well, you need to analyze the body first, which as a philosopher, that makes sense. You gotta, because we're both.
So of the body,
it's a bit interesting. So like all of that bit I kind of enjoyed. There's some parts of it that was like, well, okay. But that was a good part. Dealing with Prime Directive is always good, even if it's 2x4s. But yeah.
Right.
I think this one would be like a 7.
Prime Directive 2x4. All right. Well, that does take us to the midpoint of the end of the series, this final season. So I do have episode 9 sitting in the hopper on my my list of screeners. Haven't watched it yet.
I haven't watched 6 yet. So
I'm trying to keep it kind of fresh, so I'm not too far out there. And then once I get to the finale, I probably really want to hold back on that one until probably just the week before. So, but anyway, we did tackle episodes 4 and 5. Thank God I have it correct in the notes. And we will move on to talking about a brand new series. We're done with Enterprise. We talked about the 4th season. We talked about our hypothetical would be nices for season 5. And so now we're moving into the very much classic. And this was the first season of Star Trek: The Next Generation, wherein it took about the season was about a quarter of the way through, and I became a weekly viewer. This was back in late 1991, early 1992. I think it was the episode where, and we don't talk about it this week, where Alexander comes to live. I think it's Common Ground or not the high ground, something about the ground, where Alexander finally comes to live on the Enterprise with Worf. That was my first. I'm watching the show every week now. But anyway, this is season 5. We're going to be talking about the first 6 episodes. There are some genuine classics in here.
There's some good ones in here.
Yeah. So we start off with, I always hate when we do this, but it's kind of the nature of the beast. We're wrapping up a cliffhanger to kick things off. And again, the notes that they give us from Memory Alpha are really lousy, but I've seen these episodes so often I can kind of riff, and I feel like you can do as well. So I think we will proceed. But anyway, I will kick it off. This episode 1 is Redemption Part 2, directed by David Carson, written by Ron Moore, my guy, the Klingon guy. Now, Peter, you and I, if things all go to plan, will have the opportunity to meet Ron Moore this fall in Chicago with the 20th anniversary Battlestar Galactica show being put on by Creation, which at this point, I looked at their most recent email. I don't know if you're on their list. They have almost the entire cast.
Nice.
it's going to be present. I don't see that Katie Sackhoff has confirmed, but I would be shocked if she doesn't end up coming.
Yeah, but I do. What's his name isn't able to come because of health conditions.
Oh yeah. Michael Hogan did
Which
suffer
stinks.
a traumatic brain injury about 3-4 years ago. So yeah, that's unfortunate. But anyway, if you love Battlestar Galactica the way that Peter and I do, you should absolutely visit the Secret Friends Unite Patreon, because Peter and I are now at the middle point of season 2 of Battlestar Galactica. You can hear all our thoughts about those episodes. But anyway, Ron Moore. I know I got a little off pat. Sorry. This is from September of 1991. What a terrible description. The Klingon Civil War comes to a conclusion. Well, thank you.
I mean, yes.
That is what happened. But we get a lot of really big stuff in this episode. It picks up a few months after the end of. I got a feeling a few months after and you could look at the start date, even though it's not listed here. But you see Worf is in full play. He and his brother are running a ship together. You see him in the middle of a fight. And then it transitions over to Picard saying, hey, we have to find a way. We know the Romulans are involved. We know they're supplying the Duras. We need to find out the why. And so he has a meeting with an admiral. He says that I think we can set up this detection net. I need 20 ships and we can have this big space net, which is great that you can cast a net in space when space is infinite in all directions. But you know what? Okay, we'll put it in conventional terms so that we can have a plot around it. That'll be all right. So he does so, and it creates some B plots, like Data goes on to command one of the ships, and the guy who is his XO is kind of racist against synthetics, it's funny. April and I are watching a BBC show called Humans that was on about 10 years ago. That actress Gemma Chan was the main star of that. That's all about synthetics in normal society and what happens when they gain consciousness, all this stuff. So it's really kind of that guy was a big jerk ass. Then we follow Worf's journey that the Duras abduct him and try to win him over to her side. But the biggest part of it is that we get the big reveal from the end of the last episode was that we have actress Denise Crosby back as a Romulan, and we just really don't know anything about why that's going on. So she appears nose to nose with the Enterprise while this blockade is being conducted, and nobody's believing that she's Tasha Yar's daughter, which is her claim, until Guinan rolls around and says, yeah, you know what? Because of, my wibbly wobbly timey-wimey stuff, I happened to be there when a version of her went into the past and had a baby, because that was the story that was given by Sela, who is Denise Crosby's character. At the end of the day, the blockade works. The Romulans are exposed. The Duras family has to go into hiding. Worf had his honor back, but then he's given the chance to kill the bastard son of Duras, who was, hanging out with the Duras sisters, but of course they left him behind. A lot of crap there. And
Larsa B'Etor, best sisters ever.
Yeah, exactly. Best aunts ever. Auntie.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, even better.
Yeah, even better. But they're great sisters to each other, but they don't really give a shit about this kid. But Worf refuses to kill him. He says, this kid didn't do me any harm, which I don't necessarily know that I agree with. But at the end of it, Worf pulls out of his hat the time-honored, I'm going to quit Starfleet, but it's really not a big deal to go back, because in the parting shot in the Klingon High Council, he just says to Picard, hey, I'm ready to return to duty. And Picard's like, that's cool. And then they walk off. So that doesn't happen in the real military, any military on Earth that I'm aware of. But you know what? It's a TV show.
It happens in Star Trek a couple times.
Let it go. So anyway, very satisfactory conclusion. It's tough to hold it up side by side with the cliffhanger that ended the previous season, which was the Best of Both Worlds Part 2, the Borg two-parter, but nothing's ever really going to top that. But you know what? This is one that I have it on a single disc, and then I had, when I bought the disc, because it was a single release when the Blu-rays came out, and I had the digital code, so it's in my digital library. So it's one that I'll pull up and watch it on a plane, because I have it downloaded, because it's a solid two-parter. Solid two-parter. Yeah. So any other thoughts? I know I kind of went through it all.
I mean, you kind of hit most of it. I mean, for me, there's more Gowron, which I always enjoy, because he's just great. There's not much more to say. It's just a good episode. I love the reveal of Sela. She's a great character. Wish we had more of her. If you play Star Trek Online, there's a lot more of her.
Right.
But we Unfortunately, we don't have much more of her in live action.
There was a great comic story that was an annual from one of the current runs of the IDW comics that centered around her and time bending, that she went back and met her mother in the Prime universe. It was pretty cool. The Prime timeline, I should say. So that was pretty neat. So, well, yeah. So, all right. Status quo achieved. So we move on. Episode 2 is yours.
Episode 2. Temba, his eyes wide.
Classic.
Darmok, directed by Winrich Colby, story by Philip Lazebnik and Joe Manoski, teleplay by Joe Manoski, aired September 30th of 91. Picard must learn to communicate with an alien captain, Dathon, who speaks in metaphors before a dangerous beast kills them both. Well, yeah. Guest star of Paul Winfield as Captain Dathon, who you may recognize as Captain Tyrrell from Star Trek II.
And classic actor who also appeared in the groundbreaking miniseries Roots with LeVar Burton in the 1970s.
Right. He's been in plenty of other things, but that's the other thing I know him from.
Right, exactly.
So, yeah. So this is the episode that if you at all are a denizen of the internet, there are memes. All the memes come from Darmok. Right. So this episode is your classic. It's not First Contact, but it's basically Second Contact. Yay, Lower Decks for that term. So it's Second Contact, where they're trying to figure out how to do things, and so the Temerians decide to take matters into their own hands and just stick the two captains down on a planet and force them to figure things out.
Well, we got to do something, so we'll do this thing.
Yeah, and of course, you can't communicate, so survival is great, but they don't.
Yeah, they're also technologically sophisticated enough that they can hold the Enterprise at bay so that it doesn't end things prematurely. Yeah. They're like, we can't get through their shields, or they're doing this thing and that. I'm like, all right, they're super technologically advanced. And as we see in Lower Decks, they become a part of the Federation, or at the very least, one of their citizens. Yeah. Starfleet Academy. But yeah, at this point, they're super technologically advanced, but we can't talk to them.
Yeah, but they don't trust each other yet. And so we see a gradual bit where Picard has to share fire, Dathon shares fire with him. There's some concern about weapons and what have you, but then eventually Picard starts to get a little bit of a glimmer of what's going on. And then they start to share stories. Somehow it's not entirely clear how that breakthrough actually works, because the Temerians still speak through metaphors, but the idea is there where they start to share metaphors that have the same meanings, and so they're able to start communicating. And eventually there's a giant beast that starts attacking them, and you see them start to work together, using some of their communications to work together and kill off this thing, which they don't actually manage to. It does kill Dathon. But then Picard invokes the most horrific transporter protocol in Starfleet history, where you beam it up and then scatter its particles all over the place.
Ouch! I hate it when that happens.
So it's that's one way to kill it. Not necessarily the one that I was expecting, but cool. But then we have Picard goes to the bridge and immediately is able to quickly communicate with the first officer of the Temerian ship. It's the classic Shaka when the walls fell and all of that. So, and then we actually get the beginning of a new metaphor at the end with Picard and Dathon at Eladrel. So in parallel with Darmok and Jalad at Tanagra with the collaboration stuff. Right. So if you're interested in the Temerian language, Memory Alpha does have some. Memory Beta has a little bit more. So if you want to impress your friends, you are able to speak in some Temerian metaphors.
That's very nice. And I would say, this is heralded as being one of the classics of the series, and I'm sure if you check lists, I can't remember if we had.
It's usually pretty far up.
Yeah, I can't remember if we had this on our bracketology when we did our 100th episode.
It was in there, I think.
Yeah. Okay.
I don't remember how well it did, but it was in there.
We will, and again, when we tackle bracketology again, which is my goal when we hit episode 200, we will take a completely different crop of episodes and price them against each other. So if for some reason this one was not, it'll come back again. But this is, to me, really emphasizing the very best of what Star Trek has to offer. And I also think it's something that someone could pick up off the shelf and watch it with no context. You know what I mean? You don't even really need to know anything about the characters on the ship or about Picard, because it's just they have a great cold open where they introduce where they're going and why it's necessary to why they have difficulties, with this race, whatever it is. And from there, everything that happens is extremely self-contained. This is a great It's not a
Great
bottle
bottle.
show.
It's,
Yeah,
it's close to a bottle episode.
it is. I mean, they do a single location shoot. I think it's Bronson Canyon in LA, and I could check it. That red book back there is my TNG compendium, so that information would probably be in there. But yeah, I feel like this is one you could give to any normal person who has no experience with Star Trek, and they could watch it and go, "Wow,
And enjoy it.
that was a
Yeah.
really cool message," and I like that. So yeah, top shelf for that, and again shows up on any high list of episodes of Star Trek for the entirety of the franchise. So, all right, well, episode 3 is another pivotal one that introduces a lot of really, really important stuff going forward, including what I think is one of the most compelling characters that we get in the back half of TNG. Episode 3 is simply named after the subject of the episode. It's called Ensign Rowe. Les Landau did the directing. Story by Berman and Piller. So you got the top dudes writing a very important script. Also, the two guys that co-created Star Trek Deep Space Nine, which we'll make very clear in a while why that's important. Teleplay by Piller from October 7, 1991. That is actually my brother's 17th birthday. Isn't that weird? And exactly T-3 years to when my stepdaughter was born, because they share a birthday.
I was a few months old at that point.
Yeah, random fact that I'm sure nobody cares about. But anyway, after attack on a Federation outpost, Picard is sent to locate a Bajoran terrorist with the help of a Bajoran ensign named Ro Laren. This was not the Star Trek debut of actress Michelle Forbes. She had a bit part in the season 4 episode
Half a Life.
called Half a Life with David Ogden Stiers, wonderful episode we talked about quite some time back. But she is coming in, and this is something, again, I refer to my beautiful red Star Trek compendium, watch my pointing finger, pointed out that is, I believe that is the second or third edition of that book, but I remember reading in the first edition of the book, which came out in 1992, only covered through season 5, really pointed out that Ensign Rowe was the spark that they needed. And then otherwise, I think the words used to describe the regular cast of the show were homogenous or bland. Everybody got along. Worf sometimes threw a zinger in there, and you could be like, "Oh, Data doesn't know how to make a milkshake or something." Like, you would throw in little bits and pieces, but everybody was kind of like,
The Next Generation crew got along really, really well.
Nobody ever really butted heads, and it was funny because it also extended to the personal relationships of those actors who were very close friends off camera. But anyway, here you're bringing in a character who is a disgraced, imprisoned Starfleet officer, someone who kind of thinks the Federation sucks. You don't really know why she joined Starfleet in the first place. I feel like it's left kind of fuzzy.
That's not really answered,
because she really doesn't seem to give 2.5 shits about anything. She comes on the show, she's bristling with attitude. She's wearing her Bajoran earring. Riker busts her. Picard and Riker super not interested in having her aboard. She's assigned by this Admiral. Again, we get another Admiral Kennedy is the villain of this episode. And we walk through a plot that illustrates that this guy was hornswoggled by some Cardassians that are trying to use Starfleet and the Federation to kill off this terrorist troublemaker who lives off-world of Bajor. And this is when we're really introduced to the world of Bajor and their people, the Bajora, or as we come to later know them, the Bajoran. So they do catch a Bajora reference in a very early episode of DS9, if I'm not mistaken. I think Sisko tosses out the Bajora when he's referring to Keiko starting her school on DS9. I'm just, if that's what I'm remembering correctly.
Yeah, I think they do address it briefly.
But we get we get kind of the walkthrough, but the location set, which again is Bronson Canyon, it's exactly the same as the previous episode, is an off-world Bajoran camp. So we still have not been on Bajor at this point because Bajor is occupied for about another year by the Cardassians. It was really in when DS9 started, which was not quite halfway through what we would call season 6 of TNG. That's when they left. So this is about a year before that. So they're still doing their thing. So back on Bajor, Kira and Shakar and all of her buddies in the Shakar Resistance Cell are still doing their thing. But this is when we meet Ro. Ro forms an unlikely friendship with Guinan. And boy, anytime I'm watching an episode with Whoopi Goldberg, I'm like, God, Guinan is such a great character. She does great stuff in this, helping to kind of draw Ro out, to get her to finally trust Picard and reveal that this whole thing is a plant. And at the end of it, it's exposed and the Admiral shuffled off. And Picard appeals to Ro. He said, I know that you're not interested in sticking around, but I really like your style. I think that we could work really well together. Why don't you consider sticking around? She says yes. And she becomes an irregular character that we see throughout the rest of the season,
Yep.
and a little sprinkle of the first part of the season, then she kind of disappears before she comes back at the end of the series.
Yeah, she
Top
comes back big
yeah.
time towards like the end of
Yeah.
season 6 into season 7.
And then we got her true swan song at in the final season of Picard, but we've already talked about that. Absolutely top shelf episode. One of my absolute favorite of the series, I think, because again, you're introducing an element in there with a cast that's folks that are kind of boring. You're kind of like, okay, well, but then you have her coming in and she's like, Crusher and Troy, like, hey, can we sit down with you? No, I don't think so. I'm a badass. She's the badass James Dean, like rebel without a clue, a denizen of the Enterprise. So I absolutely love what she did. So this was a great episode for me.
I also really, really like this episode. I really like Ro as a character.
Mm-hmm.
She's very interesting. She's got a lot going on. She's also fairly amusing.
Yeah.
In her own way. Like her snark is like up here, which is fantastic. Especially when you have characters that don't know how to deal with it, like Riker, which is just really funny.
Right.
So it's very interesting here how you have like Bajoran terrorists, freedom fighters out on the edge who are supposedly fighting the Cardassians in like ancient ships.
Right.
So like there's a lot of interesting stuff where you can like as the audience you can start to tell like there's something fishy with this pretty early on.
Right.
But again, it's a really good episode just with the character study of Ro herself and like what happens with a Starfleet officer who does something and then gets put into prison. They explore that a little bit later in a different way with Paris. Not as compelling, I think. I think Ro's done a little bit better.
Yeah.
And then they try to do it also with Burnham, and that doesn't work nearly as well as either of those two.
Yeah. They kind of hit the pinnacle of
this is like the good. Yeah. This is like the top version of that trope.
It's a good space for it. No, I totally agree. Well, cool. Good deal. All right. Well, episode 4 is yours.
Episode 4, Silicon Avatar, directed by Cliff Bull, story by Lawrence V. Conley, teleplay by Jerry Taylor. Aired on October 14th of 1991. With the help of a scientist whose son lived on Data's homeworld, the crew attempt to communicate with the crystalline entity.
Little too convenient for you. I'm starting to get. I got a little hand when you were reading it. So, all right, this is yours, man. What do you think of this episode?
Yeah, so this episode we get a little bit more of a touchback on Data's backstory, which we don't get a ton of, but we get like every once in a while we get an episode. It's like, oh, do you remember Data was originally on a colony? Here it is again.
Right. I mean, it was pretty well fleshed out.
It was mostly fleshed out in the original in Data lore.
Data lore back in season 1, and then we get a return to it in season 7 when we meet, Soong's wife, or so we think. But yeah.
So we get a scientist who comes back and she says that, oh, my son was on that colony and you must know. And so you get this whole thing of like Data has like memories of journals and other memory engrams from the various colonists that he's able to retrieve for her. And so there's like this attachment that she forms to Data because he's like the last living vestige of her son in some way. And so she's like, well, but what we're here to do is we're going to try to communicate with the crystalline entity because, it seems to have some sort of sentience. And so we kind of go on a wild goose chase for a little while. We're trying to find the stupid thing. And you have some of this bonding going on, mostly one-sided.
Right.
But in the end, you discover that she's not there to try to communicate with the thing because while they figure out how to communicate, and there's actually there's actually a little bit of back and forth going between the Enterprise and the crystalline entity. She engages basically a sonic pulse and shatters the crystalline entity like that.
Right.
Instant kill.
Right.
And then everyone's just absolutely horrified. And then it's and then she gets all like, oh, you should understand, Data. Like, oh, this thing's so horrible and it's a murder. And it's like, yeah, but that doesn't allow you to just turn around and murder it. It wasn't in the middle of killing somebody. You weren't stopping it from doing anything.
And Data breaks out the speech at the end because in an earlier portion of the episode, he speaks in this kid's voice, which again, it's a little convenient. It's kind of a little heartstring pulling, and they make it a little too convenient for you.
Yeah.
But still, at the end of it, Data has this great speech that says, well, to be honest with you, I really get the feeling based on his journal, your son was really proud of your work and you basically destroyed that. So I think he'd be really sad right now. And they don't even show, they could have shown him turn around and walk out and say, bye, bitch. That would have been a great end to the episode, because then they fade, and they fade to that stock shot of the Enterprise from
Flying
Star
away, yeah.
kind of flying to the side. So yeah, here's a lady who just her entire life was ruled by her desire to see this thing destroyed.
Yeah.
And
it's the classic vengeance story. They just don't tell you right from the get-go.
And she, at the end of it, she can't even be satisfied in her vengeance, because Data hits her, with a bucket of ice water in the face, saying, well, I know your son through his writings, and he would be really bummed out that you did this thing because it was murder. So yeah, no good.
Yeah.
So that was that was probably the biggest punch of the episode. I think that was really
the rest of the episode isn't like super all that interesting.
No, not really.
But,
yeah, because you started with this woman who hates Data because she thinks he's complicit, and then she comes to love him because he sounds like her son. So this lady's got all kinds of issues.
Yeah, there's just a lot of strange things going on. Like the ending bit with that final speech is really good, but the rest of the episode is kind of like, I don't know.
Yeah, take it or leave it. No, I totally understand. All right, episode 5 is this is a straight up ripoff from an episode of the original series of Battlestar Galactica. I don't know if you're aware of that, because you and I have not talked too much about BSG TOS. But anyway, the episode is called Disaster, directed by Gabrielle Beaumont, who's a female director, one of the first to actually touch Star Trek. We talked about her in a previous episode a while back, but she was landmark for a reason that I feel like I have to click on this link, because all right, hold on, pause for station identification. Beaumont, best known directing and writing, Papa, the late, let's see here.
Booby Trap was the first one.
Yeah, Hill Street Blues to Star Trek: The Next Generation. First woman to direct an episode of Star Trek. I was correct. And lobbied to have Joan Collins cast as Alexis Colby in Dynasty. I think those are pretty two significant pieces of trivia. That's my opinion. So I knew there was something. I apologize for not doing my homework. My bad. But anyway, so story is by Ron Jarvis and Phil Scorza, not two ones that I'm familiar with. Teleplay by Ron Morse, a little bit of script polishing. October 21 of 91, the Enterprise is heavily damaged after hitting a space anomaly, trapping Picard in a turbo lift with 3 children, his worst nightmare, and others in various locations. Command of the bridge falls to Counselor Troy, who feels ill-prepared. More so with the threat of the warp core breach endangers the Enterprise. And as I said, I could circle back and tell you the exact episode, but in the single 30-episode season of Battlestar Galactica, the original series from 1978, which at some point we will tackle on the Facts of Geek Life, whether if it's Peter and I or if he defers someone else, we'll see. But anyway, cool story, I think, in a lot of ways, because you have our people all in different wacky situations. Worf is running 10 forward. He's also tending to Chief O'Brien's wife.
Midwifing Keiko,
yeah, which he does end up delivering their daughter Molly.
We are now at whatever centimeters. You may now give birth. Thanks,
and he does end up bringing it up. It does end up coming up in DS9 when the O'Briens are having their second baby, which I think is fantastic. We get Bev and Geordi in a cargo bay having to escape radiation and also a fire that's going to kill them both, which they do in a very cool, creative way. Picard is stuck with these 3 kids. They've got to get out of this turbo lift after Picard has broken his leg, or broken his ankle. He broke something down there. So that, he has to enlist kids, and he hates kids. So that's particularly kind of fun and humorous. Riker and Data have to get to engineering, but in doing so, they have to use basically Data's body as a doorstop. So he walks off with his head, which is cool. And they get to engineering and they stop this warp core breach. But the main action is happening on the bridge with Ro and Chief O'Brien and Troy, who with her honorary rank of lieutenant commander ends up assuming command of the bridge. And this episode is seen for a couple of different things, as I've read. Again, I'm going to kick it back to the Red Book. Really says this is the beginning of Troy starting to come into her own and her greater interest in becoming a bridge officer and being more involved with stuff than just listening to Captain, I feel that, being able, her ability to crash a starship starts with the desire of what she learns in this episode. Ensign Ro, again, very iconic, very, very much the iconoclast, questioning the decisions that Troy is making. Troy has to slap her down a couple times. Again, the Red Book makes mention of really there are some ways to look at Roe with her backing down at the end of this was maybe a little bit too premature in her character's development to have her to make a step back like that. But I don't know. I don't know that I necessarily agree. I think it was done well and executed well.
Yeah.
And, potentially brought her a little bit more into the fold because she doesn't stop being an iconoclast, but she doesn't have to, be disagreeable about all things at all times. So I think it was a good payoff, but again, total ripoff of an episode of TOS via G. Maybe Ron Jarvis and Phil Scorza wrote that one. I have no idea. It could simply just be from the slush script pile. So anyway, what are your thoughts?
It's a decent episode. It's not one that like sticks in my memory very well.
Right. True.
Because it just kind of, it's got a lot of things it's doing. Like you remember Worf with Keiko because that's just hilarious.
Right.
And Riker running around with Data's head is just goofy.
Right.
Like it's just fun. So like there's lots of fun things. There's also like, Picard climbing the shaft thing, singing Frère Jacques with the Frère Jacques with the kids, which is kind of hilarious. Yeah. And then he gives them like pips. He like pulls the pips off of his collar and gives them to the kids.
Yeah, and the one kid that gets the tube, she gets to be the lieutenant.
She's the number one.
Oh, yeah, exactly.
And which leads to a really funny scene at the end where it's like number one, and then Riker and the kid turn
yes,
like, yes, Captain. Which is
right. Oh my gosh, yeah.
It's pretty funny where you have the kids come up at the end and they like give Picard like pictures and stuff.
Yeah,
so
and it was a good use of the fact that there are kids on the ship at all times. I mean, there are a ton of civilians on the Enterprise. There's 1,000 people on the Enterprise, and probably
a couple hundred of them are
at least a third of them are civilians. So it's good to see them pop up every once in a while.
So it's like, and it's one of those situations where it's also not like this anomaly is caused by aliens or there's some sort of it's just something happened to the ship. And
it's akin to hitting a pothole, and your tire falls off, so it was a bump in the road and they hit it and they had to deal with it. So I
overall solid episode.
Overall,
it's
solid,
not like amazing, but it's solid.
Solid episode of the week. All right, take us home with episode 6, an all-time camp classic.
Oh boy.
Absolutely of TNG. Go for it.
All right, so episode 6, the game. Directed by Corey Allen, story by Susan Sackett, Fred Bronson, and Brandon Braga, teleplay by Brandon Braga. Aired October 28th of 91. Wesley visits the Enterprise and finds the crew addicted to a mind-altering computer game. Oh. Guest star Ashley Judd as Robin Leffler, who does appear later, I believe.
Yes, indeed.
She also makes a reappearance in Lower Decks.
She does. Yeah, she is, of course, one of every series at some juncture has background characters get launched to superstardom. Ashley Judd was a very big actress in the late 1990s and the early 2000s, really not so much anymore. And then the other one from Pop Quiz, who is a child actor who appears in season 7, who is now an enormous star.
I know that Kirsten Dunst was in.
Boom, got it.
That was who you're referring to.
I mean, there could be someone else, but that was the one. Yeah, she appeared in a late series episode, exactly. So, what do you think?
This one's special. It's one of those episodes where you're just like, like it's obvious what the message is. Games and stuff can be addicting, and so it makes you lose focus on what you're supposed to be doing. Like it's clear what the story is, but it's just like it's one of those that's a little ham-fisted.
Yeah,
but not like in a bad way. It's ham-fisted in like the cartoon ham. We're just like, this is goofy. So because the game, if you haven't seen it, is like you have these little sticks in front of your eyeballs and it projects like this field in your vision where you have these little cones that rise up and you're supposed to get discs in there.
It's basically a cell phone game. It's like Candy Crush.
Yeah, it's exactly like
I have this game on my phone, and I will actually pick my phone up in order to do this, and it's called 2248 for no good reason.
Oh yeah, it's like that. It's an idle game,
right?
But the benefit to this game is that
let me try to show it off.
Yep,
And
there you go. Just
I'm
like
pretty
that.
far along. My top brick is 25Q, and it goes.
Wow.
Yeah, I know I've been playing for a long time, and every once in a while I spend a couple bucks to get more blue diamonds. I know it's terrible. It's absolutely terrible.
Fancy. Yeah, but it
Yeah.
gives you like a boost of I forget what chemical
Endorphins.
Yeah, it's
Yeah,
endorphins.
because at one point Wesley and Robin Leffler are in sick bay, and they're going through it all. I think that sequence is kind of annoying because they're like, so what you're saying is that blah 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 this thing or that thing, technobabble. So
Yeah.
what you're
And
saying is this thing
I
or that.
love technobabble, but there's some times where it's just like
That was a bit much. So yeah, and then throughout this, the two of them develop a quasi romance, which is fortunately shown pretty much off screen, so there doesn't have to be anything about Wesley getting down.
we don't have to have any of that awkward weirdness that
Yes.
is prevalent in teen movies or episode 2, and I'm okay with
Exactly. Exactly correct. Oh my goodness. But yeah, no, but again, it's a special episode. But again, in they're hitting on all, I think all five, all six, 4 or 8 or 58 cylinders in these episodes, because they're giving us different story of the week, great kind of track concept, and then
like this one has a good concept. It's got great stuff where your addiction leads to being vulnerable, and then someone tries to control you. Like that's
exactly.
That's a classic. That's something that can happen. It's interesting.
Right.
Obviously, it's exaggerated for the sake of the episode.
Correct.
But it's still an interesting story. But to your point, yeah, when we get to season 5 of TNG, there's a lot of there's great episode, decent episode, good episode, great episode, and then every once in a while you get one that's like, but it's still Star Trek. It's just sometimes it's
but you'll still pop on season 5 and give it.
Yeah, I mean, if I have if I'm going somewhere and the game pops on TV, and I'll watch it. It's not like I'm gonna go like, oh, the game, turn it off.
It's not like it's not season 2. So
yeah, it's not like I'm gonna sit there. It's not like it's Farpoint.
Yeah, right.
I'm gonna turn that on. No.
Right. Well, all right. Well, let's wrap it up. We've got 6 episodes. Let's pick a favorite and a least favorite. Take us away.
This sucks because there's 2 episodes that I really love in this bunch. So dang it.
I know.
I'm gonna go with Ensign Rowe. For the simple reason that it introduces a character who I love very, very much, and there's just really solid writing. As a runner-up, Darmok, but I'm just going with Ensign Rowe.
And what's beautiful is I can flip the script and say the exact opposite, because I like Darmok. Thank you, because again, I feel. Without really drilling down and giving a ton of thought, I feel like you could hand this episode to someone who has never seen Star Trek, it's a
great introductory episode.
Yeah, because you can watch it, you can understand the themes. You don't really need to know anything about the characters at all. Like, this dude's the captain, and this other guy is the security dude, and this is blah blah. Actually, this episode was the first appearance of Robin Leffler. They don't mention that because she's a background character. She's running around in engineering behind Geordi, helping him out with stuff. But yeah, I think you can hand this to anyone, and it's got a great message about there are still ways we can communicate even if we don't understand each other. You just have to lean into it and work hard. And in this life or death situation, that's exactly what happens. So I'll segue into talking about my least favorite, and that we may be in alignment here, but it was Silicone Avatar. For me, I just didn't really feel that your guest starring character, while she did a great job executing, I think
a great actress,
acting, but the character in itself, and of which she ended up doing, and she probably went to prison, or at the very least was ostracized out of her line of work. She at
least got a black mark in the scientific community.
Yeah, but she absolutely, the very convenient, much like a lot of things that happened in the episode Discovery we talked about, the absolute very convenient Data can speak in the voice of her dead son because he read the journals, and it's like, what doesn't Data know? It gets a little frustrating when, he's the Mary Sue, for lack of a better expression, that there's literally everything. Yeah. He has no blind spot.
He is the MacGuffin in this episode.
Yeah. So I didn't really care for that. What about you? What was your least favorite?
I actually kind of have to agree with you. It was, I was waffling between that and Disaster, and I'm just going to go with Silicon Avatar because for very similar reasons. That, and it's one of those episodes that, like, the only thing I really remember is the end. That they kill the crystalline entity. Right. That's the only thing that I remember. The rest of it's just like
it's just very cold blooded.
And it's not like, I mean, Jerry Taylor is a great author, but a great screenwriter. But this one it didn't land very well for me.
Yeah, I hear you. Very good. Oh, I understand. All right. Well, moving on to the next episode. Obviously, we will jump into covering another 2 episodes of Discovery, and then cover another block of episodes from season 5 of TNG. So, Peter, thank you as always. Where do people find you out there?
You can attempt to find me out on the internets at Petrus Aquinas. I'm floating around there. You can generally find me at the Secret Friends Unite Discord or the Grant Petoskey Discord. You can also find me over at ELH's Twitch channel or YouTube channel, where I play various Star Trek adventure games. I ran one for a little bit, so you can check those out. They're all recorded. You can go find them.
Very nice.
So yeah, and you can find me behind the scenes at Starship Excelsior, where mostly I do just the transcripts, but you can find a couple episodes where I'm in there.
Very nice. I love it. Well, I am over on Threads and Instagram as C3 Carpenter. Go ahead and spell it out. I do spend a ton of time on our Secret Friends Unite Discord, as Peter mentioned. Best Discord in the whole wide world. Don't look it up. We do also have a Discord for the USS Grant Petoskey, which is the chapter of the International Star Trek Fan Club that Peter and I belong to. We do a lot of great events around the state of Michigan. We've also been successful in launching a lot of chapters around the state of Michigan, including one that is just getting started in Metro Detroit. If you would like to learn more, certainly feel free to visit our Grant Petoskey website, which is just that, ussgrantpetoskey.com, and send us an email to that same blob at gmail.com, and I'll be very happy to help you find a Trek experience no matter where you live. So I do want to give a plug for our Secret Friends Unite at Gmail email address. Todd and I have moved in the direction of reopening the mailbag. We want to hear from you. What are you digging in the Star Trek world? What are you digging in other fandoms? Send us a note, and we may very well just feature it on an upcoming episode if it's not too profanity laden.
Yeah, even if it's something of like, hey, you bozos forgot something.
Yeah, I would.
We can use that periodically.
And you know what? If it's a contrary opinion about not only something in Discovery, but at one of the other episodes we're talking about related to Star Trek,
like if you really like Silicon Avatar, feel free to shoot us a message.
Send an email. I think that'd be absolutely fantastic. All right, well, friends, as always, thank you for joining us. I'm going to tell you that sharing is caring, and to keep on trekking.
Peace and long life.
This podcast is part of the Secret Friends Unite podcasting network. Visit secretfriendsunite.com for more great shows, articles, news, reviews, and more. Secret Friends Unite podcasts are available on Apple, Google, Spotify, and other podcast services around the world. If you'd like to be part of the conversation, you can join us on Facebook or our new Discord server, or follow at Secret Friends U on Twitter. Please subscribe to Secret Friends Unite on YouTube and visit our merch store at tpublic.com. Just search Secret Friends Unite. Thanks for listening.